Chapter 1: The Silence in the Desert. The Arizona sun was a brutal judge.
In late 1978, the hammers stopped ringing.
The dust settled on 3 acres of sand. The massive funding had suddenly vanished into air.
The $200 million dream hit a steel wall. Machinery sat abandoned like rusted desert skeletons.
Investors in Fort Worth were closing their books.
They saw red ink instead of green life.
John Allen stood on the empty foundation alone.
He felt the crushing weight of the silence.
This wasn't just a delay for the team.
It was a funeral for the future. The blueprints were fluttering in the hot wind.
Every second of silence cost $1,000. Could a second Earth survive a bankruptcy? The world began to look away from Oracle. The local ranchers laughed at the glass cult. They saw a hole in the ground. They didn't see a bridge to Mars. 1978 was the year the desert fought back. It was the year the money died. The visionary team faced a terrifying reality check. Ambition cannot breathe without a bank account.
The silence lasted for months, growing louder.
The dream was buried under Arizona dust. Chapter 2: The Architect vs. the Ledger. John Allen was a poet of space. But in 1978, he met his enemy.
That enemy was the cold, hard spreadsheet. The 1977 designs were beautiful but impossible. They were building a greenhouse, not a world. The physics of pressure were ignored at first.
Allen demanded total biospheric integrity for the crew. His perfectionism drove the costs through the roof.
He wanted 0 air leaks for 2 years.
NASA said it was an impossible engineering feat.
The internal meetings became battlegrounds for the soul. Visionaries fought accountants in smoke-filled trailers.
The project was hemorrhaging cash every single day. Allen refused to scale back the dream. He chose the hard path of total complexity. The delay was a war of the ego. Math does not care about your cosmic vision. Blueprints were torn up and redrawn in anger. The cost of one airlock doubled overnight. Allen had to prove he was a businessman. He wasn't just a wandering theater poet anymore.
He was a man fighting for a planet. The ledger was a cage of numbers. The dream was trapped inside the red lines.
Chapter 3: The Billionaire's Brutal Doubt. Ed Bass sat in his Texas office.
He was the crown prince of oil money. But 1978 was a year of global panic. His family advisors were screaming in his ear.
"Cut your losses in the desert," they said. "It is a hole for your gold." The funding gap was a moment of truth. Bass looked at the silent construction site photos. The idealism of 1970 was now a burden. The project had no public scientific support yet. It looked like a billionaire's expensive hallucination. Bass demanded a radical shift in the company.
He froze the assets to force a change.
This wasn't a gift, it was a bet. The pressure on John Allen was extreme now. The 1978 delay was a corporate hostage crisis. Bass wanted to see patents and profits. He didn't want to fund a desert commune. Every memo from Texas felt like a blade.
The relationship between oil and soil fractured here.
The billionaire was losing his faith in glass.
He was one signature away from quitting. The dream was hanging by a single thread.
The desert heat was melting the trust. Chapter 4: The Technosphere's Underground Birth.
The surface of the site was quiet. But the underground was a war zone. Engineers spent 1978 redesigning the invisible god. They called this massive mechanical system the Technosphere.
It was the iron lungs of the world. Without it, the plants would surely die. Without it, the humans would quickly suffocate.
They designed 500 tons of stainless steel pans.
This would separate the fake Earth from reality. The 1978 funding crisis forced a radical invention. They needed to solve the air expansion problem. The Arizona heat would explode a sealed building.
They designed 2 gargantuan concrete lung chambers. Inside, a 20-ton rubber membrane would float. It was a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat for life. This engineering didn't exist in any book. They had to invent it during the delay. The dark year became a year of genius. They spent millions on pipes and water scrubbers.
The Technosphere was the secret price of survival.
The money was gone, but the physics remained. They were building a submarine in the desert. The machine was more expensive than the plants. The basement was the most important room.
Chapter 5: The Stolen Ark of Species.
The hammers were still, but the nets were full.
Scientists used the 1978 delay for a mission. They traveled to the furthest edges of Earth.
This was the great biological audit phase. They needed 3,800 species to build a world.
Every plant had to be a functional worker. It couldn't just be a pretty flower.
It had to recycle air or provide food.
Tony Burgess scouted the humid Everglades for life. Gillian Prance hunted in the deep Amazon basin.
They were building a puzzle with living pieces.
The 1978 delay allowed for deep ecological testing.
They studied how microbes reacted to sealed air.
One wrong fungus could destroy the entire forest. One wrong insect could kill the crew's food. The scientists were like Victorian explorers with bankrolls.
They were shipping a planet in wooden crates. The desert of Oracle became a temporary zoo. Thousands of plants waited in plastic greenhouses. They were waiting for their glass home.
The funding was low, but the life was high.
They were ready to seed a new world.
But the world didn't have a roof yet.
Chapter 6: The Energy Crisis Shadow.
1978 was a year of global darkness.
America was trapped in a massive energy crisis.
Gas lines were long and people were angry.
Biosphere 2 needed a gargantuan amount of power.
Heating and cooling glass is an energy nightmare.
The funding halt forced a new energy plan.
They couldn't rely on the local power grid.
The grid was too fragile and too expensive. They had to design their own power plant. It was a sophisticated 1970s cogeneration system. Natural gas would produce both light and heat. This was energy survivalism in the desert.
The 1978 delay made the project more efficient.
They calculated the sun's path with manual precision.
They redesigned the glass to trap less heat.
The architecture was a response to oil prices.
The space-age look was actually survivalist.
They were building an island of power. If the power failed, the ecosystem died. It was a dangerous game with the sun.
Every kilowatt was a drop of blood.
The crisis taught them how to be lean.
Chapter 7: The Human Spirit Stress Test. What happens to a crew with no mission?
The 1978 delay was a psychological filter.
The team lived at Synergia Ranch in poverty.
They shared meals and worked the dry land.
Many people left the project in frustration. They couldn't wait forever for a paycheck.
But the inner circle stayed in bonded. They were the first citizens of a dream. They practiced communal living with no luxury. The world outside called them a desert cult. The media began to hunt for social scandals. But the synergists ignored the noise and worked. They were the human software for the machine. The delay was a trial by fire. If you stayed in 1978, you were committed. They were ready to lock themselves away forever. This year created the grit they needed later. The team was now an unbreakable unit. The money started to slowly trickle back in. The dream was waking up from its coma. The 1978 ghosts were finally being laid to rest. The first concrete pour was finally coming. Chapter 8: The Great Renegotiation. The winter of 1978 was a turning point. John Allen traveled back to Texas for meetings. The air in the boardroom was cold.
Ed Bass demanded a new corporate vision. He wanted more than just a space garden.
He wanted a profitable center for Earth science.
Allen had to sell the laboratory concept now. The project was restructured as a venture. They stopped being just a troupe of dreamers. They became a board of directors with goals. This was the business of survival phase. Patents were filed for every new invention. Water recycling systems were now commercial assets. This pivot saved the project from total death. A new infusion of capital was slowly approved. The checks began to clear in late 1978. The legal teams finalized the new SPV structure. The dream now had a corporate shield. It was no longer a desert experiment alone. It was a high-stakes ecological tech startup. The path to construction was finally clear again. The billionaire stayed. The vision survived. The engines in Oracle began to roar once more. Chapter 9: Breaking the Desert Floor. The first concrete pour happened in early 1979. It was a moment of pure, raw joy. The foundations were deeper than a 6-story building. Thousands of tons of cement flowed like rivers. They were building the world's most complex basement. This was the bedrock for the artificial ocean. The 1978 delay made this pour possible. They had spent the time calculating the weight. The pressure of the salt water was a monster. Engineers watched the drying concrete with intense focus. One crack could end the mission years later. The site was now a hive of activity. Hundreds of workers arrived from across Arizona. The local economy in Oracle began to boom. The glass cathedral was finally rising from dust. They were pouring the future into the ground. Every steel bar was a promise to Mars. The desert floor was being reclaimed by science. The skeletal white frames began to reach up. The silhouette of the rainforest biome was visible. The 1978 ghost was officially gone now. The project was a physical reality at last. Chapter 10: The Glass and the Heat. Glass is the enemy of the Arizona desert. It traps heat like a giant solar oven. The engineering team faced a thermal nightmare now. Thousands of glass panes were ordered in 1979. Each pane had to be double-tempered and strong. They used a special leak-proof white steel frame. The sunlight would expand the metal every day. The 1978 lung design was the only solution. As the air inside heated, it expanded fast. The massive aluminum discs in the lungs rose. They floated on a cushion of air and rubber. This was the rhythmic breathing of the world. Without this design, the glass would simply explode. The sound of the lungs moving was eerie. It felt like a giant, hidden animal breathing. Workers spent months sealing every single tiny joint. They used a secret, high-tech industrial compound. It had to withstand the brutal desert sun. The structure was becoming a giant, beautiful jewel. It reflected the purple Arizona sunset perfectly. The mirage was turning into a machine. Chapter 11: The Living Ark arrives. The crates began to arrive at the site. The 1978 botanical missions were paying off now. Trucks carried tropical trees through mountain passes. Millions of gallons of salt water were mixed. They were creating a mini ocean in the desert. It featured a real, living coral reef system. The mangroves were planted by hand in mud. The rainforest was a jungle under the glass. Every species was a cog in the machine. The soil was alive with billions of microbes. The 1978 biological audit was finally being tested. They introduced cockroaches to break down dead leaves. They added bees to pollinate the fruit trees. It was a delicate, high-stakes balance of life. The scientists worked like gardeners from the future. They lived in the shadow of the steel. The smell of damp earth filled the dry air. The desert was now a tropical wet dream. The animals were the final piece of life. Everything was ready for the human crew. Chapter 12: The 1978 Legacy for Mars. Why does the 1978 delay still matter today? Modern space agencies look at this year closely. It taught us about the financial barrier phase. SpaceX and Blue Origin face these same walls. You cannot reach the stars on hope alone. You need a bridge of solid, sustainable capital. The 1978 pivot saved the project's scientific value. It proved that closed system ecology is a business. We used the 1978 water data for Mars. We used the 1978 pressure data for moon bases. The dark year was the real mission training. It taught the team about human resilience. It taught them how to survive total failure. Biosphere 2 is a monument to that grit. The building is a mirror for our time. It shows us the cost of building Earth. It shows us the cost of losing Earth. The 1978 blueprints are a map for Mars. The struggle was the most important part. Chapter 13, The Final Breath of the Mission. Welcome to the end of our journey. Biosphere 2 stands as a silent sentinel now. The 1978 funding crisis is a distant memory. But its lessons remain in the glass walls. The mission proved that nature is incredibly complex. It proved that we cannot fully own life. John Allen's dream was flawed but beautiful. Ed Base's gamble changed the world of science. The facility is now a global research hub. It helps us understand our own changing planet. The Plan B reminds us to save Plan A. There is no replacement for Biosphere 1. The 1978 delay was a test of faith. The team passed that test in the dust. They built a world in the desert heat. They gave us a vision of the stars. Thank you for joining us on Synapse Daily. Your support keeps these historical stories alive. Share this mission with the world today. Take care of our only home, Earth. Until next time, keep looking at the sky.